Hello. Today I'll be exploring the contemporary issue, reimagining what counts as literacy, using a posthumanist perspective. My inquiry question today is how can posthumanist perspectives help early educators reimagine literacy beyond narrow assessment-driven definitions? This topic is significant because literacy is often positioned as a set of measurable and individual skills such as reading, writing, and phonics. However, this can overlook the diverse and the complex ways that children make meaning in everyday life. In this presentation, I will draw on posthumanist theory alongside the research and literature and professional standards such as the AITSL professional standards to critically examine the current literacy practices and propose some more inclusive approaches for my future teaching practice and what I've already done to improve my teaching with literacy. A key issue in early childhood literacy education is the increasing influence of accountability-driven frameworks, including the national testing systems such as NAPLAN. Research by Harris et al. 2013 highlights that programs such as NAPLAN can significantly shape classroom practice, often narrowing the curriculum towards what is testable and what is measurable. Similarly, Rose 2023 argues that literacy teaching is increasingly influenced by bureaucratic demands and data collection, which can shift the focus away from children's meaning-making and towards performance outcomes. This creates what Hipwell and Klinowski 2011 describe as the literacy demands of assessment, where the children must not only learn literacy, but also learn how to demonstrate it in specific and institutionalized ways. As a result, literacy becomes less about the communication and more about compliance with assessment structures. Much of current literacy practice is underpinned by developmental and cognitive theories, which assume that literacy develops in predictable stages. These approaches often emphasize the phonics instruction, reading accuracy, writing development, and measurable progress indicators. Westwood, 1996, notes that teacher beliefs about literacy acquisition strongly influence how literacy is taught, often reinforcing skill-based or linear models of development. Similarly, Moore, 2016, highlights structured approaches to reading instruction that prioritize consistency and measurable comprehension outcomes. While these approaches can support foundational skills, they often position literacy as something as individual and linear and accessible rather than relational or contextual. These literacy assessment practices can also contribute to inequality. Badger and Wilkinson 1998 found that traditional literacy assessment systems often disadvantage students from diverse and socioeconomically marginalized backgrounds, particularly when assessment practices do not reflect their cultural or linguistic resources. This raises the important questions: what counts as literacy? Which literacy practices are valued? Whose knowledge is recognized in assessment systems? These questions highlight that literacy is not neutral. Instead, it is shaped by institutional power, curriculum design, and policy decisions. AITSL 2022 emphasizes that teachers must use evidence-based strategies and differentiate learning. However, the challenge lies in balancing mandated curriculum expectations with inclusive and culturally responsive literacy practices. The theory that I've chosen today to unpack my inquiry question is posthumanism. Posthumanism provides a theoretical lens that challenges traditional assumptions about learning and literacy. Kuby, Spector, and Thiel, 2018, explain that posthumanist literacy theories rejects the idea that meaning-making is solely human-centered. Instead, literacy emerges through relationships between children's material, technologies, environments, objects, and social interactions. This aligns with the broader posthumanist thinking, where knowledge is seen and distributed as across non-human and human actors. From this perspective, literacy is not only confined to reading and writing, but also includes any process of meaning-making that emerges through these entanglements. Using a posthumanist lens, literacy can be reimagined as multimodal, embodied, and relational. For example, literacy might occur when children construct stories using natural materials, engage in dramatic play with objects, use digital tools to document experiences, draw symbols in the sand or in soil, communicate through movement and gesture. Rather than asking, can the child read and write? We instead ask, how is meaning created through relationships between the child and the environment? This approach values literacy as an ongoing process rather than a measurable end point. In my future placements, I would implement a post-humanist focal point to direct my future planning and implementation of literacy. My goal is to broaden opportunities for children to demonstrate literacy beyond the traditional means and activities. So this would include loose parts and natural materials, drawing and mark-making tools, digital documentation such as photo and audio, opportunities for collaborative storytelling, where children will be encouraged to create narratives through construction, movement, oral storytelling, visual representation, interactions with materials. This approach is informed by the posthumanist theory using QB and supports the EYLF and EITSL expectations for intentional teaching and responsive learning environments. Using this approach, this aligns with the EITSL Standard 2.2 Content Selection and Organization. So I would design literacy experiences that include multimodal forms of communication, select content that reflects the children's interests and context, move beyond print-only literacy activities. This also aligns with EITSL Standard 2.5 Literacy and Numeracy Strategies. So I would support literacy through oral language, play and interaction, integrate visual, spatial and embodied literacy practices, use documentation as a literacy tool that ensures literacy is taught in inclusive and developmentally appropriate ways. This issue also raises the important ethical considerations. Educators must consider who is recognized as literate, which children are positioned as successful, what forms of knowledge are excluded. Assessment systems can unintentionally privilege dominant literacy practices, which may marginalize diverse learners, said by Badger and Wilkinson in 1998. However, ethical literacy practices require educators to critically reflect on these systems and respond in inclusive ways. By drawing on posthumanist theory by QB and literacy research, educators can move toward practices that recognize literacy as diverse, relational, and context-dependent. In conclusion, while accountability systems and assessment frameworks such as NAPLAN have shaped literacy education, Harris and Rose, they also narrow our understanding of what literacy is and what it can be. By integrating post-humanist perspectives, we can reimagine literacy as something that emerges through relationships between children, materials, and environments rather than something that is simply measured. This shift allows educators to create more inclusive, ethical, and responsive literacy practices that recognize the full capabilities for all learners.